Prescott City Council regular voting meeting, Tuesday, January 26, 2016. Want to welcome everybody that came out to participate with us today. We appreciate that. Also, anybody that's speaking from the public, remember, try and keep your comments to 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning before your 5 minutes is up. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any announcements or introductions?
No, I do not. Thank you for the opportunity, though.
Okay, our invocation today will be given by Reverend J. Wilshire of the First Congregational Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Councilman Blair.
Let us pray. We give you thanks, O Holy One, for these your servants who have given of their time and their talents and their energies and their lives to serve this city. We pray your blessings on them today. Give them wisdom and direction as they face difficult decisions, competing interests. It's never easy for them, we know, and so bless them with wisdom and guidance. And bless this city. And we ask particularly today for our poor and our homeless, your special grace. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, roll call, please.
Mayor Obert.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Yes.
Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr is absent excused. Councilman Shiska.
Here.
Councilwoman Wilcox. Here. You have a quorum.
City Manager, do you have any announcements?
Yes, Mayor. Next Tuesday, February 2nd, marks the beginning of a new setup for the City Council meetings. On February 2nd, there'll be a study session at 1 o'clock p.m., followed by a voting meeting at 5:30 p.m. in the evening.
Okay, thank you. Clerk, go ahead and read the consent agenda, please.
Consent agenda, item 1A, approval of minutes for the City Council meetings held on January 12, 2016. Item B, approval of water service agreement number 15-006, city contract number 2016-022 with the Jason Orpheus 2014 Trust and Colleen Johnson 2010 Trust for the remodel of a boarding home into an apartment complex at 223 East Willow Street, APN 113-16-067, deferred at the 12/15/2015 meeting. Item C, approval of water service agreement number 15-015, city contract number 2016-090 with Eureka Apartments LLC for the remodel of an extended stay home into an apartment complex located at 1141 East Gurley Street, APN 114-06-084A. That was also deferred at the 12/15/2015 meeting. Item D, award of city contract number 2016-138 for purchase of the pavement, roadway, and street infrastructure asset management systems module from Lucidity Incorporated, including a technical support and training in the amount of $16,051.60 Streets Fund. Item E, approval to perform night work along Walker Road in conjunction with the Walker Road Pavement and Utility Upgrade Project. Item F, approval for the purchase of one each sewage lift station electric motor from the Keller Electrical Industries Incorporated in the amount of $16,047.01 wastewater fund. Item G, ratification of payment for sole source purchase of an engine and transmission overhaul for truck number 1321, side loading solid waste vehicle by Cummins Rocky Mountain in the amount of $29,826.66. City contract number 2016-143, solid waste fund. Item H, award of city contract number 2016-128 to Gosnay's Mobile Container Repair LLC for solid waste dumpster repair services in an estimated annual amount of $15,000, solid waste fund. Item I, award of city contract number 2016-145 to Granco Machinery Company of Gilbert, Arizona for the purchase of snowplow edges in the amount not to exceed $25,000, 1% street and open space fund. Item J, approval of city contract number 2016-140 with the Federal Aviation Administration in the amount of $18,578.95 to perform a flight check of navigational aids at the Prescott Municipal Airport, ADOT and Airport Fund. Item K, approval to purchase software from Acela Incorporated to manage the agendas, materials, and minutes of city public meetings and enable web streaming in the annual amount of $19,524. City contract number 2016-159, various funds. Item L, approval of memorandum of understanding with the Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe for 2015 pass-through contribution of funding to various community nonprofit recipients. City contract number 2016-157. And item M, approval of memorandum of understanding with the Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe for 2014 pass-through contribution of funding. City contract number 2016-158.
Okay, I have a request from council to pull agenda items B, C, and I for further discussion. Do I have a motion on the remaining items?
Mayor, I move to approve consent items A, D, E, F, G, H, J, K, L, and M.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Vote, please.
Passes 6-0.
Okay, item B, comment, please.
Yeah, Mayor, I just actually have a question on B and C. They're kind of related, and it's to Craig or somebody, Leslie maybe. Are these coming out of our alternative water?
Yes, sir. Portions of, I guess I should explain that. We
Okay.
have portions of them are on groundwater that was existing, and a very small portion is coming out of the alternative water supply.
Small portion, meaning like more than, or less than
And-
20%, 10%, something like that?
1.5 acre feet or.
Okay.
Yeah, less.
I have another question. These two projects, how does this work? Do they find out if they have the water, or do they have to go and put the permits in and their engineering and all that, and then they find out if they have water or not, or is it the other way around?
The process that the city has had is if you file a building permit, then we start writing the water contract. Prior to that, both of these went to a pre-application conference so they could have the benefit of all the information from the various city departments of what might be needed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on items B and C? Okay, we'll move on to I. I have one question on that. It's for $25,000, but the sales order is only indicating $7,122.82. So just like to try and find out where the rest of the money's going.
Mayor and Council, good afternoon. The Street Maintenance Division is requesting authorization to go up to $25,000. Right now, we only plan on buying one order of plow edges for the $7,000. We are not sure what kind of winter we're going to have the rest of this season. Everybody's talking about El Niños and La Niñas, and we could go through more plow edges if we do get some more heavy snows coming up over the next month, so we just want to be prepared with the additional authorization in case we need to buy more.
Okay. How long does a set of blades last?
Set of plow edges, they last anywhere from a year to 2 years potentially, but if we do have to do heavy plowing, we can go through a set fairly quickly.
Okay, so you have 12 plows,
We have 12 plows.
and you're ordering enough cutters for the 12 plows for one,
Right.
at least for a short period of time.
Basically, one whole round of plows in reserve.
Okay, and then the rest of the money be used if you need to buy more. Would you
Oh.
go ahead and buy more to have some already on hand for next year?
We may, we'll see how the season goes, and if we have any funding left over to come the end of the fiscal year, we might go ahead and reorder just so we have the inventory.
All right,
We'll see how it goes.
okay, thank
Okay?
you. Any other comments, questions on I? Do I have a motion to go ahead and approve these items?
Mayor, move to approve extra consent agenda items A, B, and I.
I think it's B, C.
Oh, I'm sorry, B, C, and I.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion, a second, vote please.
Passes 6-0.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first regular agenda item.
Item 2A, adoption of ordinance number 4964-1502, amending Prescott City Code, Chapter 15-1-12, vehicle speed limits and parking to adjust parking fee amounts and days of collection at city recreation facilities, general fund. Ordinance number 4964-1502, an ordinance of the Mayor and Council of the City of Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona, amending Chapter 15-1-12, vehicle speed limits and parking by deleting certain provisions of that chapter to now reflect collection of parking fees 7 days a week at select city parks and penalties for violation of this chapter.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Just a little background on this item. The parking fees started in the city of Prescott in 1979. I think Councilman Blair was there when Goldwater Lake opened. That was the first fee area in the recreation areas. And then in the early 2000s, after Willow and Watson were purchased and the improvements were done to both of those lakes, they became designated fee areas also. Back then, everything was done on the honor system up until 2010, at which time we installed some automated pay kiosks at 4 locations. That's Willow Lake, Watson Lake, Goldwater Lake, as well as the Peavine Trail off of Sundog Ranch Road. In fiscal year 15, approximately $175,000 was collected through the pay kiosks, and I think it's important to point out here that those fees were instrumental in offsetting costs for maintenance and improvements to the parks, throughout that time. The proposed fee increases look like this, with the current annual pass being yearly pass being $80 and the proposed being $100. We also have a 40 visit pass currently for $40 or $1 a visit. The proposed would be 40 visit pass for $60 or $1.50 per visit. Currently, we have a 10 visit pass for $10 or $1 per visit, and the proposed would raise that to $2 per visit for 10 visits, $20, and the daily parking fee would go from $2 to $3. The fee increase related to the elimination of the free Wednesday parking that we currently have is expected to produce about $36,000 annually. The parking fee increase for the daily and multi-visit passes is estimated to produce an additional $80,000 per year, and for a total of $116,000 between the two, or approximately 9.4% of the Recreation Services operating budget. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, I think I heard you right. Do free Wednesdays stay?
Free Wednesdays would go away.
Go away. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Wilcox, or Council?
Thank you, Mayor.
Woman Wilcox.
Yeah. This is probably a question for the city manager. Is the increased revenue restricted to Parks and Recreation, or does it just roll into the general fund?
Well, it would be revenue to the general fund. The way that's addressed is in the annual budget, and if that budget can be adjusted depending upon how this revenue and other revenues in the general fund are proposed to be used.
Okay. And then a question for Joe. Do you anticipate having paid parking at the other trailheads, like the North Peavine Trailhead, the Pioneer Park trailheads, and the Willow Lake Trailhead?
Councilwoman Wilcox, yes, we are looking at especially the North Peavine Trail to make things equitable. Right now, we're looking at a compatible pay kiosk system. The ones that we currently have, when we go to replace them, we would like to maybe go to a different system. So anyway, we're looking at that to make that more equitable on that trail system.
Okay. And then one final comment, and I know you're aware of this. If we could get those machines working 100% of the time, I know our revenues would increase. I use the trails a lot, and I would say at least half the time there's somebody really stressed out because they can't get the machine to work. They don't understand it. They can't see the screen in the bright sunlight. So I'd like to, really devote some attention to making that more efficient.
That's part of the reason we're looking at a different system, but I would say that they work pretty well. Patience is the key. It takes a minute for the transaction to occur, but if you opt out or do something wrong, it's going to redo it. So it does cause problems, but okay. They are pretty efficient.
Any other comments from the council? Any comments from the public?
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. My name is Barbara Jacobson. I live in Prescott, Arizona. I was busy this week and didn't notice that this was on the agenda, and this is a burning desire of mine for years. I wish you wouldn't increase it to $3, but I know you're going to. So past that, and I have run myself through the system to see what happened a few years back. It also mentions on here that the penalties for violation, and you didn't mention what the penalties, how they would be changed?
The penalties don't change in the city code.
Okay, because it mentioned something about them, so I didn't know if they were going to change. But I would like to see the penalties lessened. The penalties for a $2, now probably a $3 in a few minutes, parking are exorbitant. I think it was $50, and then if it wasn't paid in a timely manner and you couldn't get in to see the judge because his dates were only so many dates and you were busy, it went to $80. But the worst part is your credit is ruined. And that, I was a single mom in this town, and $2 or $3 to me was a whole meal at Taco Bell when I had my kids. I couldn't have gone to Parks back then. I couldn't have paid this back then if I wanted to give the kids a dinner out. We never did pizza, by the way. But to ruin someone's credit for a $2 parking fee is crazy. And we have people in this town who can't have their credit ruined. Can't have their credit ruined because they are living on that credit. And then to have the penalty be higher than parking downtown. The parking downtown penalty is lower than the recreation parking penalty. Please consider what you're doing. Yeah, it is. I think it was for the $10 parking ticket downtown, it was $30. But for this, the penalty was $50. And it may have already gone up and I haven't paid attention. But the penalty is higher for a $2 parking fee missed. And it shouldn't be that high. And people should have to do that and have to have their credit ruined for a little recreation, use of recreation. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Dan Beyer, B-E-Y-E-R. I'm a resident of Prescott. 50% increases to fees. Isn't that a little exorbitant? I mean, from $2 to $3 or whatever, or 25% for an annual. Just, you know, it's a little steep. Also, free Wednesdays. You know, a lot of people here, yes, are retired, and they probably enjoy going out on Wednesday and hiking. For one day of the week, they get to go out. You take that away from them, too. You raise the prices. You just keep compounding it on and on and on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Richard Steelman, Prescott, Arizona. People don't like these fees, and they should have passed the 5-5 when they had the opportunity to. This is just the beginning. Later on this year, this council is going to be asked to find maybe, what, another $750,000 in cuts? And you're not going to be able to find them. Because Councilman Arnold would have found them last year. You're going to have to lay people off. That's where it's going. These fees could have been averted. Instead, we're going to have to learn to live with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi there, Bruce Senko, Prescott. Yeah, speaking for the single mom and maybe others, I can afford the $1 every other day. But, you know, if you're a family and you want to go walk the Peavine Trail on a Wednesday for free, it's one of the benefits of living in Prescott. One day a week to be able to go take your kids and go for a walk. It'd be nice to keep that. Maybe raise the fee on the shoulders when maybe the Valley people come up and want to go see our trails, raise them for the Fridays and Saturdays. You can get some revenue there. I don't know if this is a wash on what we're trying to achieve on the revenue, but it'd be nice to keep that free Wednesday for folks. I voted for every tax there was. We got a great city. I wish they would have passed. They didn't. But I don't like the nickel and diming and taking things away from the residents in Prescott, so I'd like to see that stay. And I was here 2 weeks ago. I was hoping to hear back from the city. Haven't heard anything yet. Also, somebody told me they'd call me 24 hours later. I still haven't heard from that gentleman. So the city needs phones, I think.
Okay, we're working on your issue, I can tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Daniel Matson, Prescott, Arizona. I just thought, you know, he talked about people in the city not getting back to him as quickly. Well, we had to get rid of a really great person in the, you know, the city hall here, Patty Krause, and move her over to a different department because this tax didn't pass. I think a lot of people cut off the city's nose to spite their face, and somehow we need to pass a tax to cover our unfunded liability for PSPRS, and maybe we could straighten out some of this mess. In the meantime, those who voted against the tax, you asked for it, you're getting it. We don't really have a choice.
Thank you. Anyone else? You do have a motion?
You got a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilman Jiska.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Joe, have you taken a look and seen fees in other areas, other rural areas like ours? Then how do they compare to that?
Well, locally, the Prescott National Forest, Thumb Butte, and those day use areas, Granite Basin Lake, Lynx Lake, are $5 per day, whereas we're $3. Their annual passes are $80. They're a little bit less for their annual passes, but I would, I guess, argue or point out that the amenities that go with the lakes that we have, I think, are superior in that, take Watson Lake, for example, you've got Frisbee golf, you've got day use Ramada areas, you've got fishing, you've got hiking, you've got a lot of amenities that go with that admission fee or that parking fee.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
John, about the penalties, I know it refers to punish as provided in section 1-3-1 of this code. Do you recall what the range of penalties is, and does the judge have discretion in imposing that penalty?
Well, normally the parking citation, and I don't have the numbers on top of my head, and if they're 50, if that's what the code says, it is. I think the downtown parking fines for going over the 2-hour limit, I think, starts at 35, but those ones also include, I believe, a court surcharge. So at the end of the day, if you get a downtown parking ticket, it's roughly around $60 or $70. But you can go in. I mean, you can go in and get a hearing, obviously, before the fine becomes final. You do have that due process right with the traffic hearing officer. It's usually done right here with the hearing officer. So you do have the ability to sort of plead your case, as it were, to the hearing officer, and the hearing officer can reduce that fine or lower it or something. And as far as I just want to sort of address, I guess, this issue on credit. The only time that any kind of civil traffic fine affects your credit is if it goes to collections. So if you don't pay the fine, if it's levied against you, and the court then goes out and goes to actually has a collections agency that goes out and tries to collect those, and that may go on your credit. But it does, just as a rule, just because you get a parking ticket and then get it assessed and then pay it, that shouldn't affect your credit in any way. It's only when it goes to collections, which usually is it takes some time before it actually goes on there. And I believe that there are oftentimes payment arrangements that can be made. So if it is an overburden, oftentimes the courts will allow for some sort of payment arrangement, a couple months or something like that.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the council? Do you have a motion?
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 4964-1502 with the change that we keep the free Wednesday parking.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Vote, please.
Passes 5-1. Councilman Blair dissenting.
Item B, please.
Item 2B, approval of submittal of a grant application to the Federal Aviation Administration in the amount of $150,000 for acquisition of snow removal equipment for Ernest A. Love Field, Prescott Municipal Airport, FAA, ADOT, and General Fund.
Good afternoon, Mayor, honorable members of the council. This item is actually just to seek approval to submit a grant application to the FAA for their consideration of awarding a grant to the city of Prescott for the piece of equipment that's listed on the board behind you. This actually, they call this a snow removal apparatus, which is a snow broom, if you will. It could be the oscillating broom can range from 12, 14, 16 to 18 feet in length, and it also has a blower that accompanies it behind it. This is a grant eligible item. This item was not included in the fiscal year 15 budget year, and by submitting this grant application is basically a dedication from the city to the FAA that the local funds will be available once the procurement process is satisfied according to the procurement regulations. This actually, I want to consider this as an all-weather apparatus. Currently, the airport and the fleet department co-own a street sweeper, if you will, that was purchased 8 years ago. The street sweeper is mostly utilized by the fleet department Monday through Friday to sweep all of the streets within the city of Prescott. The sweeper is then used on the weekends for sweeping various pavement surfaces out at the airport. There's a consistent issue with what we call FOD, or foreign objects and debris, and we call, which is rocks, a lot of different debris that ends up on pavement areas and taxiway areas, either by rotorcraft, downwash, or a lot of other purposes. This piece of equipment would really be an innovative way in which to address any FOD issues that occurs year-round. This could also be utilized as a tow-behind piece of equipment behind, it's a 10-ton, but a dual wheel equipment, piece of snow removal equipment during the winter time. So this broom would obviously be able to alleviate any of the FOD, any of the snow as a pull-behind mechanism behind an existing snow plow. So this grant application, once submitted to the FAA, the usual process is they consider this for a grant. Once they award the grant, then staff usually proceeds with the procurement process. After the procurement process has been satisfied, the grant has been awarded, and then the staff will be once again, through the city manager's grace, come back to the city council for consideration of awarding the grant, accepting the grant, and awarding the actual procurement of this piece of equipment. Are there any questions?
Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What would be the monetary obligation for Prescott in this thing?
The grant is for $150,000, which is the approximate value of this specific piece of equipment. The local share is 2.5% of that, sir, which would be $3,750.
Thank you.
Councilman Lozelle.
That is exactly what I was going to ask, is what's our obligation on the city's end financially, and that's important, and we're getting a great piece of equipment for that little amount of dollars. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the council?
Mayor
Any
Oberg?
public comment?
Mayor Oberg, Councilwoman Orr wanted me to read her
Go ahead.
comments into the record. Councilwoman Orr says, I believe this action is a win-win for the city of Prescott and all of our airport partners, such as the FAA, Great Lakes, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the Forest Service, Legend Aviation, Guidance Aviation, and Prescott Area Users Association.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Richard Steelman, Prescott. Mayor, council, that thing looks like a piece of junk to me. For that kind of money, Manager Cox, I'm sorry.
Go ahead and address me. Yeah, address me.
Whether it's city money or federal money, it's still our money. And we could buy a couple of them brooms and put them on pickup trucks, and we'll do a lot better for 150 grand. That thing looks like a maintenance nightmare. I worked the flight line a long time, and that ain't gonna do nothing. That's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
My name's Dave Roy. I'm with Guidance Aviation.
Prescott resident and also with the Airport Users Association. I'd like to advocate for this piece of equipment or one like it. I can't speak to as whether or not this one is a piece of junk, but I'd have to assume that it works. We operate a fleet of almost 20 helicopters, and believe me, small rocks and stones and debris that are out on the ramp greatly affect the operation and safety of our program. Anyway, I think at 2.5 cents on the dollar, I think it's a great investment. Again, whether it's this piece or one like it, I think I'd like to see this grant come through. Thank you.
Any other comments from the council? Anybody from the public?
Mayor and Council, John Olson, 14 Brookside, Prescott. As a longtime user of the airport, probably the oldest gentleman owning an airplane on an airport, I think I've gone through a lot of innuendos in regard to how the airport is managed. I think we have the best management possible in Mr. Cox at the present time. Obviously, this piece of equipment is specialized. It's not a piece of junk, I can tell you that. And it serves several purposes, the main one being safety. When I talk about safety, I mean debris that ends up on runways. Any kind of chunks of asphalt, rocks, or whatever that can be damaging to airport propellers, this will help alleviate. It's designed for airports, and it has multiple uses. The small amount of money that's involved here certainly justifies your approval. I just want to say that I'm very appreciative, being such a long-time user of the airport, the interest in the monies that this council has put into that airport. That airport and its environs are probably the biggest economic generator that we have in the community. If you look at guidance, if you look at Embry-Riddle, if you look at the fire base and other industries that are there, they're providing a great deal of revenue to this community. And to be able to keep it in the proper shape, we need equipment of this nature. The cleaner that is being used at the present time just isn't adequate for airports. It's too small. It doesn't cover the whole airport when it is available, and we need to replace that with a safety feature that we think is necessary. That airport is, as I said, is an economic engine for this community, and we need to keep it in this best shape that we can. We have lots of itinerant aircraft, we have helicopters, we have jets from all over the world landing here now. Legend Aviation is another operation that is absolutely a winner for this airport. But we need support for this sort of thing when the monies are very small and the benefits are very great. And there are going to be grants available from time to time that are necessary to keep that airport in the situation that it needs to be. So I want to thank the Prescott City Council for their efforts in this regard, and I would hope you would vote positive on this issue.
Thank you. Any further public comment?
Mayor, Council, Sandra Smith, Prescott. I can't speak to that particular item, but I do know that FOD is a very hazardous thing. It's what brought the Concorde down. Piece of metal on the runway. They need to be able to sweep the runway more than once or twice a week. And especially when they're using fleets of helicopters, because those things are really bad about kicking everything up. So I hope you will go with something along this line.
Thank you. Any other comments? Do you have a motion?
Mayor, I move to approve the submittal. Mayor, I will defer to Councilman Shiska.
Thank you, Councilman Lamerson. I move to approve the submittal of a grant application to the Federal Aviation Commission, Federal Aviation Administration in the amount of $150,000 for acquisition of snow removal equipment for Ernest A. Love Field / Prescott Municipal Airport.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second vote, please.
Passes 6-0.
Your next item, please.
Item 2C, ordinance adoptions for code enforcement.
Mayor and Council, these ordinances that are before you for discussion and direction today were actually discussed internally among staff as far back as September 2014 in dealing with various issues and concerns that arose primarily related with the rehab group homes. As you know, we've gone through the specific zoning ordinance amendment to deal with those specific issues. So these ordinances today are really broader, and they're sort of a universal or citywide application. There are 4 issues for discussion. One is legal nonconforming uses. As we've discussed in the past with the prior council, and maybe to a lesser degree this council, when the city changes a zoning ordinance, a use that's in effect at the time isn't affected by that change. In other words, there is a property right in maintaining that a particular use, even though a change in the zoning ordinance may make that an illegal use going forward. So those are called legal non-conforming uses. They don't conform with the current zoning. Currently, the city's land development code has a 1-year presumption. In other words, if the non-conforming use ceases for 1 year, the presumption is that use has been abandoned, and then it can't be, and once it's abandoned, it can't be restarted or reinstituted. The proposed, or the draft ordinance before you would change that for residential zone districts to 6 months for a presumptive abandonment, and leave in commercial and non-residential zones the 1 year the 1 year requirement. The second ordinance is a smoking ordinance or a non-smoking ordinance, however you want to look at it. I won't go into great detail because you all have the draft before you. I know you've gotten a number of comments from members of the public, and I will just say that the smoking ordinance that's drafted in front of you is allowable under the Arizona Smoke-Free Arizona Act. That state law allows for municipalities and counties to have more restrictive smoking regulations than the state law provides for. This particular ordinance was drafted in probably the broadest or most restrictive manner. So in other words, I would not recommend going further than what this ordinance restricts under its draft, because I think you get sort of, would be reaching too far from a legal standpoint. However, there's nothing that would prevent the council from, ratcheting back the restrictions in the ordinance. In other words, you drafted it broadly with the idea that this was for discussion. You would consider it, you give direction, take this out, add this, those kinds of things. So it's sort of a very broadly drafted ordinance. And again, these aren't, and none of these are sort of recommended by staff. This is for a council discussion. The third one is a neighborhood preservation or property maintenance. Right now, Prescott has a fairly lax property maintenance code. The property maintenance ordinance that's before you for consideration and discussion, it creates a more restrictive property maintenance requirements for homeowners and property owners throughout the city. The last one is what we call a nuisance property ordinance. We sort of mirrored it or blended it based on a couple of college town ordinances, primarily dealing with sort of party houses, one being Tempe and the other being, I think, wherever Dartmouth is in New Hampshire. And so these are sort of more aggressive or more sort of cutting edge type ordinances dealing with properties that have activities on them versus the property maintenance is the standard or the status of the property itself. This last ordinance deals with activities that go on the property and allows for the police department and code enforcement to have another tool in the toolbox to deal with properties that are a continuing nuisance or continuing disruption to a residential neighborhood. As you can see from it, it proposes or it contemplates some special fees for ongoing or repetitive calls to a particular property if it's disruptive. Primarily noise, could be drug use, those kinds of things that affect the sort of tranquility of a neighborhood. In addition, obviously, to the special service fee, which is really intended to recoup the cost of going to these calls or going to these residences if it's within a certain time period. They're a staggered fee. There's also enforcement mechanisms like fines and citations and those kinds of things on top of that fee. So, and again, it tries to deal with particular properties where the activity on the property is disruptive to the neighborhood. So this is really, again, for your discussion and direction and deliberation. No vote today on this. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on any or all of these.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for putting forth the effort that we've given you direction in the past to go with. If I can just briefly go through these 4 issues and summarize for myself. The legal non-conforming uses, I'm okay with that. That's a no-brainer. I can't support the smoking on residential or parks. I mean, I just can't do it. We're already overreaching on a lot of things federally, state, and municipally, but that one I think goes too far. The neighborhood preservation property maintenance, I think the spirit of it is good, but then you get into the wording where it says offensive to the senses. I mean, that's way too subjective. And comfortable enjoyment of life. I mean, we all have our perception of what those things are to each one of us. So I think that's kind of hard to enforce. I'm not saying I'm not against, or I'm against that. It would just have to be worded differently to word more defined other than 1 or 2 people's senses. And the nuisance property, I think I can support that one, but I could not support currently the way the preservation. I mean, most of the town is homeowners association, so they already have their hands full with that one. I, for one, don't live in a homeowners association just for that purpose, and I definitely can't support the smoking.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Thank you, Mayor. Someone sent in an email to the council asking what feel-good liberal politician drafted up this proposed change to our local smoking ordinance. I just want you all to know it wasn't me. I have some reservations about regulating smoking on private property also. But I would like the council to consider prohibition of smoking in outdoor public places that are owned by the city. I think we have a particular problem in more congested areas like the downtown, which will affect our tourism, where people are forced to walk through bar patrons who are smoking outside on the sidewalk on Montezuma Street. That is one area that I've noticed is a problem. There may be other areas in the city, and I think it is within the jurisdiction of the city to regulate smoking on property that it has to manage and control, not just inside City Hall or city facilities, but outdoor as well. And I would like the council to consider the same kind of prohibition for electronic smoking devices and add that definition to smoking, so that we prohibit things like e-cigarettes, e-cigars, e-pipes, e-hookahs, vapes, not so much because they spread smoke to other people, but they give the wrong impression that it's okay to smoke. So if someone sees someone with an e-cigarette, a cigarette smoker thinks, oh, it must be all right here. So I think we need to treat those two things the same way in the definition. And I have some language here, which I'll be happy to pass to the other members of the council. The clerk has a copy. This is just for your, for your consideration as we move forward in our discussion. The other ordinances I don't really have a problem with. The legal nonconforming use, changing that to 6 months for residents seems fine. The only one I wanted to address really was the smoking regulation in public outdoor spaces. And I do agree that we need to prohibit smoking in city parks, particularly because of the fire danger. Our city parks include a lot of natural areas that are dry and include dry oak, grasses, and cigarette smoke. I've seen many cigarette butts on the trail, and it disturbs me because those cigarette butts could lead easily to a grass fire and to something far worse.
Golf course?
Golf course? Is that a park?
Cigar? Well, it's city-owned property.
Afraid so.
Mark Whitfield, could you put this up on the screen so people can see it?
Thank you. I'm sure there are, exceptions and so forth that you could come up with, Councilman Lozelle, but my concern is that public places are open to everyone, and while it may be the right of an individual to smoke, it's not their right to force other people to breathe that smoke in a public place.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. When we work hard enough, Gene, we do find common ground. I oppose the first smoking ordinance. I have a private property that I lease. I don't appreciate the government sticking its nose on my private property. People can't come into my store because I don't allow smoking in my store. That's my choice, and that's their choice. It's in a free market system. They don't have to come into my store if they want to smoke a cigarette while they're in my store. And nobody holds a gun to their head and forces them to come to my store. So it's a matter of personal choices. Public property becomes a little different issue because everybody in the public owns that property. Public rights of way. What this community did by disallowing smoking in my private property, pushed it out on public property. So now what you've done is you've created a real problem out there. So, I don't have a problem saying you can't smoke on public property. I do have a problem sticking your nose into private property. That's private property. That's not yours. It's mine or somebody else's. So very similar to some degree with Mr. Lozelle. I want the government to keep its nose out of my business on my property. That's just the way it works. On the other hand, all the people of the city of Prescott ask me to serve their property, and it's their property that I'm concerned with. The free market will dictate who comes to mine or not. So that's where I'm at on this.
Thank you. Councilman Shiska.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, I'm not a smoker. I don't like secondhand smoke. But I think this is just flat un-American. I'll tell you what, I cannot go along with this because I think that we're on a slippery slope. All of a sudden you get rid of this in public places and what's next? So I think that to a point, people have to be responsible for their health. And I think that if they don't want to walk by a place where smokers are out on the street smoking, they don't have to do that. But I'm not going to legislate that and make those people pariahs in their own town. So that's where I stand on that.
Councilman Blair.
I'll be pretty direct. I can't support any of it that affects my ability as an individual to do what I feel like I need to do. If I'm at a baseball field and somebody's smoking, I'll get up and move. But I shouldn't be the one telling somebody they can't do what they want to do. I get tired of that crap every day. So from my standpoint, I wouldn't support any of it. I can only imagine, because I'm a guy that likes to smoke my meat, and when I have my smoker going on at my house, I can only imagine somebody next door saying, we don't like his smoke, it bothers us, so what does this bring us to next? Somebody that doesn't like my fireplace smoke, somebody that doesn't like my smoker smoke. You know, I just think at some point in time we legislate way too much, and I'm one of those guys that agrees with Jim. I don't think we should have had a smoking ordinance in the first place in the state of Arizona, because as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't go to a restaurant that had smoking in the restaurant. I believe in making choices, and that was one of those choices that I would make. I'm not here to wish another law, a draconian law as far as I'm concerned, on anybody.
Any other comments from the council? Okay, we'll go to the public. Remember, this is, we're not voting today, we're just getting information. And what I like to do, first of all, is to do them in order here so that we stay consistent, focused. So we'll go with legal non-conforming uses first. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay, we'll go to smoking. Anybody want to comment on smoking? Step on up.
And council, mayor, good afternoon. Thank you for your service. We do appreciate it. My name is Dan Beyer, B-E-Y-E-R, and I live in the city of Prescott. As many of your councilmen said today, you stop smoking, what's next? My smoker, my barbecue pit, my fire pit, my tiki torches, my candle, they all burn. You're right, slippery slope, Pandora's box. Where do you stop it? The golf course. A foursome is together, usually about 150 to 200 yards away from another foursome. So the group of foursomes that I play with, we enjoy having a cigar. We're not bothering anybody else. We're having our cigar. We're enjoying the public golf course where you sell beer, you sell liquor. You know, come on. If you're going to, it's no worse than beer or liquor. So let us have our cigar on the golf course and enjoy it. Public spaces, we try to stay away from people. We avoid people if we have a cigar or something like that. But give us our freedom. Don't mess with my property. I paid a lot of money for that property. You've already restricted it with building codes, setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. If I want to smoke a cigar, I will. If I want to fire up my smoker and have it smoke, I have the right to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor. Hi, council people.
How are you today?
Doing fine, thank you. I am Terry Sitico. I'm a 26-year resident of Prescott, and I agree with the majority, with the exception of Ms. Wilcox, on the smoking. You cut your own throat when you put out the bars, disallowed smoking in the bars. People smoke, people drink. If you're not going to allow us to smoke in the bar, we're going to smoke outside. If you bothered to put up more ashtrays, I'm sure that more people would use the ashtrays. As a rule, most smokers are not the kind that just going to flick. I don't flick. I know how to strip my cigarette and put it in my pocket if there isn't someplace else to extinguish it. And most importantly, don't you dare tell me what I can and cannot do on my private property. I pay taxes, and until the city of Prescott makes my mortgage payment and pays my property taxes, you keep your nose out of my backyard. I am over the age of 18. I pay for my cigarettes. I pay dearly for my taxes on those cigarettes. I pay an exorbitant amount of money extra for my health insurance, my life insurance, and everything because I choose to use a legal substance that the rest of the city seems to think is bad for me. Well, if secondhand smoke was truly that bad, I can guarantee every one of us would be dead right now. We would not be having this discussion, because I can guarantee that at least 90% of us grew up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s with people smoking in the house. And I sincerely hope that the rest of the council decides not to take up this, enact this smoking measure. It's invasive, and we do not need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Mayor, Council, Sandra Smith, Prescott. I'm going to rebut that. I have asthma. If there is no free space where there's fresh air without smoke in it, I run the risk of being triggered all the time. I just had a smoking table moved down outside of my window at my apartment because it was too close to the building where it was before, even though it wasn't outside anybody's apartment. I can't even open my windows now because it comes right in my window. Even though it's supposedly the 20 feet from my window. It doesn't look like it to me, and I haven't gone out and measured it. But this is a problem, and I'm not the only person in this town with respiratory problems that are triggered by tobacco smoke. I know a lot of people even in my building who are. We need spaces. We need to be allowed to live too. So think about that, please.
Thank you. Next.
Mayor and Council, my name is Josh Lethbridge. I'm a resident of Prescott. Since everybody seems to be on mostly the same page, I won't rant and rave. I will point out that I looked up for some kind of historical perspective on other communities that have passed this kind of ordinance, and the only examples I could find were from California. So I can't recommend taking that example and moving it into Prescott. And I will point out an irony that most of the organizations that this appears to be targeted at have their own smoking ban on their own property, which forces their residents out onto city streets and into city areas. And if you look at these areas, you will see them standing along your street corners, along our street corners, smoking cigarettes. So I don't think that this is the proper way to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, and I appreciate hearing what you guys have said so far. Thanks.
Thank you. Next.
Mayor, City Council. My name is Ross Bassoni, and I live in Prescott. And I'm not a smoker, but I think whoever came up with this ordinance stinks. And they must have come from San Francisco or something like that, because it's ridiculous, I mean, and as far as the asthma goes, I also have asthma. And not only does smoke would trigger my asthma, women that have heavy perfume triggers my asthma. Are we going to have an ordinance against that? Or maybe a man that has too much cologne on, or maybe it's just body odor, So as long as, if you're going to consider ordinances, are we going to consider all of it? Just because it might offend somebody or it may react to their asthma. I agree that the government seems to want to direct us from cradle to grave. And I'd rather go to the grave the way I want to go, not the government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Barbara Jacobson, Prescott. My first life, I keep going to the past. I was a respiratory nurse in the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona has drawn over the decades, mostly in the 60s and 70s probably, and prior to and a little after, a lot of people due to respiratory illnesses. I think you have to consider we're a little different state because of that. And people have found, for the most part, some relief here. Granted, you can't prevent every smell from coming into everyone's nose, but I think you still have to read the research on the health. People who smoke can smoke in their houses, but they don't want to anymore. They want to go outside because they don't want to live with that shit. Isn't that interesting? And they can smoke in their cars. And when we have fire restrictions, they have to smoke in their cars, but they usually don't. I think there has to be enforcement, even of the little bit. For example, if there's a fire restriction and I ask my neighbor not to smoke outside and throw her butts around, I think that's fair. You know, or not to have her fire pit or her tiki torches going, because I live in the forest and it's very dry. And I think smoking, though, beyond the fire restrictions and the butts being thrown out and the grass fires being started, is about personal health and personal choice about that health. And smokers can still smoke in their houses and their cars, and they can smoke on their private property as far as I'm concerned. But when I walk down the street outside the bars in the evening, and if I were a tourist, nobody, and I don't know where the police are today, but nobody is enforcing that 20-foot rule either. They're right outside the doors, and it's like, okay, let's get through. And if I were a tourist, I would go, not pleasant. I walked through a California town a few years ago, and I thought, what is different? I can't remember, was it Del Mar, one of those that's prohibited outdoor smoking? I thought, wow, this is so weird around here. What is so different here? Nobody was smoking on the streets or on the beach boardwalk. It was so nice for those of us who want to smell the ocean and not the smoke. But again, I ask you to consider, and I know you're not responsible for people's health. We are responsible for paying for some of their health care when they get sick. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Your Honor, council members, a lot of you know me, some of you don't. Eric Chester, I've been a resident in Prescott for over 25 years. I'm a local practicing attorney. I'll keep my comments very brief based upon the sentiment that's been expressed here already. And I did send an email yesterday. Hopefully some or most of you read that. But there were a few points I wanted to pick up on. Councilwoman Wilcox, you mentioned we should ban e-cigarettes too. And I think this sort of goes to the heart of what's going on here. This is an agenda-driven ordinance. It has nothing to do with science or fact. We don't like the appearance of people smoking. That's bad enough. This goes far and beyond anything that any municipality ought to consider. My goodness, the appearance of impropriety of somebody smoking when there's no smoke, there's no fire. So there's none of these dangers that have been expressed. And that's what seems to be going on here in general. The preamble to this ordinance states, whereas secondhand smoke in any concentration is dangerous to public health. That is a false statement. That is a false premise. There's absolutely no scientific evidence which would support that statement. I've read over a dozen studies of tobacco smoke in outside areas and measuring the particulates. And almost every one of them have concluded once you get to about 6 feet or further from the smoking source, there's negligible or no particles at all. That doesn't mean you can't smell it, but it means it's not a hazard to anybody. Even the World Health Organization has a standard for this. Maybe you're not aware of it. It's 35 micrograms in the air. And they don't consider that having any effect on a person unless it's a continuous 24-hour exposure to this 35 micrograms. It is not a true statement that any secondhand smoke is a danger. So you're starting with a wrong premise. Now, I would prefer you don't limit public the city property, city parks, whatnot, for just that reason. Somebody's more than 6 feet away, there's no effect. Even if they're closer, it's negligible. But that's city-owned property. City can do what it wants with it. To tell me as a private property owner what I can do with my property, that I can't sit on my own back deck and enjoy a cigar with my friends, that is beyond overbroad. You want to look at this from a group home position, and you're trying to affect a huge number of city residents, and you need to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Mayor, Council, City Manager, City Clerk. I'm Dan Lundberg, resident of Prescott, native of Arizona, 30-year retired officer, U.S. Army. After fighting for our freedoms, this ordinance, the proposal on banning smoke is totally against our country's freedom. And on private property, enjoying a premium cigar, again, most of the statements have been said already, so I'll keep it brief and just say that it's a slippery slope. Where do you stop? All of the different smokers, chimneys, all the things that we have learned to enjoy, what are we passing on to our youth? We will have no freedoms at all. And so I'm encouraged by the majority of the council statements, and I believe that you will consider those concepts that we've brought before you, and I trust that you will maintain our freedoms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mayor, Council, my name is Roy Smith. I'm a resident of this town. Our country is awash in addiction. It's the biggest problem we're facing in our country today, period. Drug addiction. Tobacco is addictive. I'm not talking about any of the other issues you've been raised here. Private property, the slippery slope. I think many of you have already gone down the slippery slope, far beyond what this discussion calls for. This town is well known as a rehab center. People come from around the world here. They pay $10,000 a month to get rehabilitated here. And we're a council that is essentially condoning addiction. We feel that's fine, because it's a national issue. Everybody does it. That doesn't mean to say it's all right. So when this council decides not to do anything about smoking, it is essentially saying to the young people in this town, hey, this is a great place. Addiction's okay. I have a friend right now whose daughter is in a coma from suicide, attempted suicide, because she's addicted to drugs. I'm not saying people are going to die from being addicted to tobacco, except 500,000 people a year die in America from tobacco. Nationally, it's about 15% of the population that smokes. In Prescott, it's been determined it's about 30%. So you have a problem. I'm not campaigning for prohibiting tobacco. I'm only raising the issue that it's a national issue, addiction, and if you're comfortable with addiction, then fine. It's a national problem. They're saying New Hampshire now, it's not the election that's the issue, it's the fact that so many young people are addicted to drugs and it's killing them. So that's an issue to consider. You don't allow drinking on the main street, do you? You allow tobacco. Tobacco probably kills, or drinking rather, kills probably far more people than tobacco. So you have to make some choices here. It's a moral question. The message you give to this community is this council doesn't care about people being addicted to nicotine. So why will you be uncomfortable when they're addicted to marijuana? It's an addiction. You've got to make a choice. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? I'll take two more and then we'll probably go ahead and move on.
Thank you, Councilman, Mayor. My name is Steve Shenefield. I live in Prescott. I moved here because of the clean air. I'm a 28-year veteran of the U.S. Army. My lungs were all but destroyed in the Army, fighting for the freedoms we have in this country. I spent a lot of time as an inpatient at National Institutes of Health, and they managed to save my lungs. When I attempt to walk down the street in Prescott past the bars, I have to muscle my way or hustle my way past the smokers that are blowing smoke in my face, which triggers severe lung issues with me, which I moved here to get away from. I've heard people, even on the council, say, well, don't walk on the sidewalk. So we have the police chief here. I would like to ask him, is it okay if we walk down the middle of the street?
Yeah, ask me, I'll ask him.
Could you ask him?
Respond to that?
Yeah, we would prefer you not walk down the middle of the street.
Okay, so now you've given us no place to walk. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more comment and we'll move on to the other two issues we have on this discussion. Okay, do we have one further comment from Councilwoman Wilcox?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that there is a state law and there are state regulations that are more restrictive than what the city has on its books right now. If we do nothing else, I would like to see this council adopt an ordinance that is consistent with state regulations so that our local code enforcement officer and our police department have the authority to enforce the state regulations as they're written. And that's the 20-foot from the entrance. You can smoke 20 feet from the entrance to a public place, including a commercial business. Right now we have little to no enforcement because that is left up to a state agency which can't get here and be on time, but our police department can respond to complaints. Furthermore, there could be a fine if there's a conviction.
Okay, I'll take one more comment on this from the public. Other than that, we'll move on.
It's all well and good to talk about having the enforcement. Unless I've misread the budgets for this city of Prescott, we have no money to enforce. We're cutting back on our fire department. We've cut back on our police department. Who in the heck is going to do all this enforcement? Unless you give more money to the police department to add more officers to regulate a perfectly legal substance, unless you have more firemen out patrolling the forests and every place else, the lakes, with that, what are you going to do? Where are these magical people going to show up from, Councilwoman? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next issue, and that's neighborhood preservation and property maintenance. Does anybody want to make a comment on that? Okay, looks like nobody wants to make comments on that. We'll go to nuisance property. Anybody want to make a comment on nuisance property ordinance?
Richard Steelman, Prescott. Hello, Mayor, again. I read this on the website, printed it out, and read it 5 more times. It may need some tuning up, I don't know. These are ordinance options for code enforcement. They're not laws. No one's going to jail for any of this. It just tells people over the age of 18 how to act in public and respect your neighbors. A lot of people have a problem with that, and I don't know why, but they do. I want to share something with you. I walk a lot, often, down Smoke Tree Lane, and it's the most level area I can walk to get home. Tend to walk, when I walk, I look at the sidewalk so I don't step in some certain things that when animals are taking their owners for a walk, they tend to leave things on the sidewalk, so that's where my eyes are.
Could you speak in the mic a little bit better? Thanks.
This right here, I found on Smoke Tree Lane. This is a hypodermic needle used by a heroin addict. He was nice enough to throw the cap on before he tossed it out the window and it landed on the sidewalk. This, to me, made it personal. We talk about addiction and so on and so forth in this town. and it's epidemic. It's from coast to coast. It's not unique to Prescott. But there's a lot in here that gives teeth to what I think was lacking in our police department. We need a metric to measure how good our police department is, and this is it right here. This tells the Chief Monahan what we can expect from him when people call up and they need help from the police because of nuisance. I won't go into what nuisance, because it's all right here. Right now, when the police are called out, they usually address one individual. No, the person who calls has no idea how it was resolved. The police leave, and within an hour, the nuisance is back. And the people typically don't want to call the police again because they think then they're the nuisance. This, like I say, I don't know. This might be a draft. I'm not sure. I think this is fantastic. Again, it's an ordinance. It's not an overreach. In my opinion, it's not an overreach of government because it's not law. And the police always have discretion. They can do what they think is best. And of course, our city council can instruct on top of this. But we don't have any of this in our town right now. And I think we need a lot of this so that the people, like I say, who are over the age of 18 and just haven't learned to behave properly, maybe this will help them along. Because you see, the system that I see right now with drugs is the state has turned my city into an open-air prison. Because instead of sending a drug criminal to do their time where they belong, they can send them here instead. In effect, turning my city into an open jail. There might be 1,000 of these people walking down my streets every day, in the stores, everywhere. And I resent that. I resent my city being used as a way to keep people out of prison and avoiding even going to court. Dana, you might give that to the mayor for me, please. If people want to clean up, that's a conscious decision. We make that on an individual basis. That's why the failure rate in this town is so high. Because these people didn't make a commitment to get cleaned up. They made a commitment to stay out of jail, and that's why they're here in Prescott. And when they throw syringes on my street, it's personal. We're way beyond talking now. I don't want to call the chief out. I don't want him to come out. It's the last thing I want. He's going to come out and he's going to protect this guy. Because this guy ain't mad, I am. Now you can figure out who needs the protection. This is war. There ain't no excuses. None'll work. I would sincerely think about adopting a whole bunch of this. I'm not offended by none of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hello. Amy Hurst, Conifer Ridge Lane, Prescott. I agree with some of what the prior gentleman just said. I think we do need this. And the thing that I'm most agreed with what he said had to do with the fact that this would put the burden on the nuisance creator to clean up the problem rather than having the burden be on the person who is being offended or bothered or, you know, having the nuisance put on me. And having to call the police and call again and call again and call again. And I agreed with him. You really don't want to be yourself a nuisance by calling the police repeatedly. And so I really like this concept of putting the burden, of putting a timeline, a remediation plan, you know, et cetera, for these repeat offenders. And so I'm all in favor of this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Come on down.
Mayor, council members.
Afternoon.
My name is Connie Cantelme. I live downtown here in the historic area. I've been complaining about this thing for 10 years. I've watched our properties all around us be blighted. Nobody does anything about it. It affects all of our property values. It affects our way of life. And I just want to say I'm in complete support of this. I'm also in complete support of the smoking ban in the public areas for health reasons. The difference between a drink and a cigarette is they can control where the drink goes. The cigarette goes up all of our noses. And as a daughter, watched my father die from lung cancer. It's a horrible, horrible disease, and I don't wish that on anybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll wrap this up. We'll go on to our next agenda item. Do I need to give you any further?
Well, I guess, is there any sort of direction that the council as a whole wants to give on any one or all of these? You know, should we bring them forward, or what's the council's desire?
Any comments from the council?
I have a comment. I think the last one is certainly something worth moving forward. The last one being the nuisance ordinance. I just want to make sure that this is properly vetted with staff about the process. I think you and I had a little conversation about that, but are we getting the most cost-efficient process in play here? There are a lot of opportunities and a lot of contact points between code enforcement officer and the perpetrator of the nuisance. So I know you're going to take another look at that. You know, I've already expressed my views on the smoking ordinance, and I guess everyone else on the council has too. That one is a bit confusing, but you'll have to bring something back to the council on that one. I definitely would like to see something addressing smoking in public places and making our city ordinance consistent with the state health regulations.
I have a question. You know, and there's part of me that understands the Whiskey Row deal where we force people outside and they're smoking on a sidewalk. So maybe it could be looked at as public right-of-way, meaning streets, you know, to preclude it from being in a park. If I'm going to Goldwater Lake to have a private party of any type and I rent a Ramada and I'm being told that people there can't smoke if they choose to, I'm not all about that. But when you are handcuffed and not even having a place to traverse on a public sidewalk because there's no place to go, I think it can be looked at as being rewritten to have public right-of-way.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. Somewhere, I agree here with Councilwoman Wilcox that we probably should go forward with the two issues that we seem to all agree on, and that's the first and fourth one, so we can at least get those drafted and going, and then examine the middle two with either some compromise or just let it fail or pass.
Any other comments from the council? Okay, I think what we want you to do is go ahead and pursue completion on 1 and 4 and come back to us with some alternative proposals on 2 and 3. Is that sufficient for you?
Got it.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Item 2D, legislative update. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Today is the 16th day of the second legislative session of the 52nd Legislature. To date, there have been 813 bills submitted, so we are working on reviewing all of those and determining what the impacts are. I would direct you up here. I just want to point out that this year I'm hoping to be tweaking the process a little bit by bringing you some bills and some recommended positions on those bills so that you have a little bit further information. So for February 2nd, your next meeting, you'll have this in your packet ahead of time. It's always going to be slightly out of date because the packet comes out and there are still actions happening at the legislature, but I'll be able to update you on those at the actual meeting. So just before I get into these, a couple of dates of note for the legislative session. February 1st is the last day for Senate bills to be introduced without a special action of permission, and February 8th is the last day for House bills to be introduced without special permission. So outside of the budget, which generally receives special permission, we can expect to see some of those bills being introduced kind of dropping off here as we move forward in the process. Of note, at the top of the list here, you'll see that these are separated by legislative agenda item. You might recall that the City Council approved a legislative agenda a couple of 4 weeks ago regarding the session, and one of the issues on there was substance abuse recovery homes. Representative Noel Campbell from our district did introduce House Bill 2107, and it was first read and assigned to committee, and it had its first committee hearing yesterday in the County and Municipal Affairs Committee in the House. I'm happy to report that did pass out of that committee with the minor amendment that was mentioned in a recent article. It makes that bill completely permissive for cities, towns, and counties as far as adopting health and safety regulations, and it also increases the number of people in any structured sober living home receiving outpatient treatment from 25% to 35% to address some of the smaller homes and exempt some that are more operating like a family where there may be 3 or 4 people living together. So that did pass out of committee on a 5-3 vote. It will need to be going to rules. All bills do go to rules. That's more a technical committee. Then to committee of the whole and third read vote on the floor of the House. If it passes through that process, it will move over to the Senate to be heard and assigned in committee there. So I would point out that we did have representation from the city yesterday, not just the city, but members of our community. There were 14 individuals that signed in for the bill, including the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, obviously the City of Prescott, the Center for Arizona Policy, Protecting Arizona's Family Coalition, the Arizona Council of Human Service Providers, and Health Choice Integrated Care, which is the regional behavioral health authority for Northern Arizona. So that is positive, but we still have work to do on that bill moving forward. Moving down the list here, we are still
Before
awaiting.
you go on to the next one, I think we're looking at a resolution also to support that bill.
We are, and as noted there, we have drafted a resolution, and that will be before the City Council on February 2nd at your voting session.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on to PSPRS reform, that is the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System. This has been topic of discussion for quite some time in Prescott and is also on the legislative agenda for the city. There is not a current bill that has been introduced, but as we've discussed in the past, there's been a significant amount of work done in stakeholder groups, and we would fully expect to see a bill introduced shortly. There is a goal to have that move forward quickly through the House and Senate. I think we can expect to see dually assigned bills, one introduced in the House, one introduced in the Senate, move through, and if there aren't changes in either the House or the Senate, or if there are the same changes, then a bill can move through in as short as a week or week and a half if it is dually assigned, if it's introduced in both houses and moves forward. So obviously we're coming up on some deadlines. I think we can probably expect to see something introduced soon, and we have been monitoring that and have met with Senator Lesko, who is the chief person at the legislature who's been working on that issue and who we would expect to introduce the bill in the House, or in the Senate, excuse me. The Prescott legislative agenda also talked about preservation of local funding authority and opposition of any preemption of local authority, and also addressed our static and decreasing general fund revenues, which is all related to both state shared revenue and the exemption of various taxable items from the municipal tax code under which we operate. House Bill 2026, municipal tax exemption for residential use, was introduced by Representative Mitchell. It has yet to be assigned to committee, which is positive. However, something can be assigned committee and receive a hearing at any time. I would point out that this legislation is slightly different than the legislation that was introduced last year. This is, as written, only going to impact municipalities with a population of over 100,000 in essentially Maricopa and Pima counties. So even with that limitation, that's a $75 million impact to the cities that are located within those counties with that type of population. If it were to apply statewide, which I think we should be concerned about, considering this exact same legislation without the limitations was introduced by the same representative last year, that's $90 million statewide to cities and towns, and for Prescott specifically, that's $1.37 million a year in sales tax revenue that we would no longer be receiving if that category was exempted from our tax base. So obviously the recommendation there is to oppose the bill. Hopefully it won't receive a hearing. However, it may. House, go ahead.
I think one of your concerns there, as you expressed to me some time ago, was that right now it looks like it doesn't affect us, but as it goes through committee and gets to the floor, it could be changed to where all of a sudden we find ourselves included in this. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Mayor, and it is not uncommon to see these things introduced and passed in 1 year, and then a year or two later to see it expand to the rest of the state. So I think that's a legitimate concern considering the dollar amounts that we're talking about for the city of Prescott. House Bill 2267, prime contracting classification repeal. We've been talking about simplification of tax for quite a number of years now, since House Bill 2111 was passed. As part of that bill, there was a significant change to how construction sales tax was collected. In the past, prime contracting sales tax was essentially collected at the site where the construction occurred on a percentage of the total construction at whatever rate that city or town charged for construction sales tax. We have what is a fairly convoluted law on the books now to try to address the impacts of the tax simplification and not lose the significant amount of revenue that we receive as a city from construction sales tax. This would repeal the existing new language, create a new category, essentially categorize underneath manufactured building dealer, and have the state collect all of the tax on construction and somehow figure out how to remit that to cities and towns based on the total value of all of our building permits across the state. So that is concerning because it is difficult to know how that is equitable. Even right now, with the changes to state law, we are projecting that we will continue to receive about $2.5 million a year from the construction sales tax. Half of that is obviously general fund, half of that is the streets fund. So that is a significant concern if construction sales tax continues to be whittled away, whether that's a $500,000 hit or the total hit. That's a significant source of funding for the City of Prescott General Fund and Streets Fund, much like the residential rental tax. So I would recommend, if that moves forward, that we would oppose that for obvious reasons of revenue constraint. Moving on to preservation of local funding authority in opposition of preemption of local authority, House Bill 2391 was introduced. Municipalities' water rates requirements by Representative Bowers. Essentially, this addresses the process that a city has to utilize in order to change its water and wastewater rates. It requires a cash flow analysis of costs and expenses to justify the rate adjustments, and there is some somewhat confusing language that also has a tie to impact fee statute within that section of law now, and you may recall the very long process of adjusting impact fees that you underwent about a year and a half ago. Impact fee statute also is very strictly related to new development and growth paying for development. And there are a number of concerns about how that does and doesn't apply sometimes to how a water and wastewater system works depending on the city that you reside in. It also prohibits the use of municipal fees or charges to pay the cost to acquire a private utility, likely not an issue for Prescott. But again, it is another reduction in the current powers that a city or town has regarding operation of a water and wastewater utility. So primarily based on that confusing and unclear language about how we would have to apply impact fee law to setting our water and sewer rates and how that might impact and change our ability to timely adjust water and wastewater fees for how our system operates, I would again recommend opposing that bill. It hasn't received a committee assignment yet, but it's a bill of concern. And then finally, a positive one. I thought I'd throw that on there. Other bills of interest. This doesn't directly relate to any of your legislative agenda items, but Senate Bill 1042 was introduced for the Prescott Historical Society for continuation of that through 2024. The Prescott Historical Society, if you're not aware, exists for the preservation, maintenance, and perpetuation of the Governor's Mansion and Charlotte Hall Museum and Grounds, which is right here in Prescott, Arizona. And that society also receives funding through legislative appropriation. In the current year state budget, there was $825,800 appropriated, and that is within the governor's executive budget proposal that was released last week, 2 weeks ago. So I would recommend that we obviously support that. It is, as you may have seen in their most recent tourism study, a very highly visited attraction for our destination of Prescott in the downtown area. And obviously, I would recommend supporting that remain as an appropriation in the state's general fund for the Historical Society. That is what I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Council, have any questions or comments? Okay, I'll give a couple of minutes for anybody from the public that might want to comment on any of the legislation that's being proposed right now. Come on down.
Just from here, it's good enough for me. I would propose to have the alleys be the access for smokers on Whiskey Road.
Okay, thanks. No further comments. We'll go ahead and close this meeting.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Allison, are you looking for a recommendation from the council or agreement?
Councilwoman Wilcox, Mayor Oberg, today, if you don't have any, overwhelming concerns with this, the only recent action was on the substance abuse recovery homes, and I think we have pretty clear direction from the legislative agenda that we can move forward on that. And then the Prescott Historical Society item did move out of committee yesterday as well, so it's moving forward. What will happen in the future is this will be on you will get this in your packet, and then it will be up to the City Council. If you have concerns, please raise those, and we can adjust. It's a fluid process at the legislature, so I would say if there are concerns, please voice those. If there are not concerns, I will assume that I have the go-ahead to continue to work with our lobbyist on these issues.
I have a question.
Okay.
It would seem, based upon what I see on that top line, 2107, that a resolution is going to be sent in support of that effort. It would seem to me that the two that are critical as well for us is 2026 and 2267. Wouldn't it be appropriate for us to send a resolution of concern about how that's going to affect our operations in our city if those were to move forward?
I agree.
I think that needs to happen.
Any other comments? You happy now?
I'm sorry, these don't even have committee assignments, so just from a legislative strategy, I wouldn't recommend sending a resolution on a bill that may never see the light of day in a committee. So if we can just adjust and wait and make sure that our timing is appropriate and that we don't anger Representative Mitchell over his bill when we may need him to vote for 2107, and Representative Cobb, who we may need to vote for 2107. Those are just some considerations I would have. This is really sort of part of the legislative strategy, and providing a resolution of support in advance of or opposing something when it hasn't even seen committee can damage us in other areas.
I can appreciate that, but although we never in the past have ever sent a resolution down, so if they do see the light of day, as you put it, I think they need to have a little bit thicker skin than to have a very community that's affecting, to understand why it's affecting us. So if it reaches the light of day, I would suggest a resolution.
Well, I'd recommend, too, that we talk to Barry Aarons, the lobbyist, because I think he has good insight on this kind of thing and tell us where that's appropriate.
I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out. As I said before, I like to end with a famous quote or comment from some of our founding fathers, and I think today's session, talking about freedoms and property rights and everything else, is something that we ought to keep in mind. Even at this level here, we do have a lot of influence on people's lives. And George Washington said, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. And force, like fire, is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." Thank you. Meeting adjourned.